that something was taking place in the upper atmosphere, but it wasn't right. And we were given the response that, well, these are just clouds. It's quite normal for these aircraft to make clouds, quote, clouds, unquote. And don't be alarmed and don't be concerned, and everything is normal. But unless we had a knowledge of why it was wrong, it was difficult to express that. And so for many years, you had a very effective strategy of a barrage of trying to claim that, everything was just normal as could be, and keep your mouth shut, there's not really any problem, with no really effective way of showing and declaring that something was wrong. So what we're going to talk about tonight for a minute is how a cloud is formed, and how, if you wanted to, you could demonstrate that for yourself. And in my work, if you follow the work through, you'll see that I started making a distinction between clouds and contrails. And that distinction is pretty good. It took too long to get to that point, but that distinction is accurate. And the distinction is this. If we take a contrail, the process is actually fairly simple in terms of physics, in the sense that nothing is really required beyond moisture in a cold environment, at least at a fundamental level. Of course, there's many factors that can affect things during formation, but the basic constituents are moisture in a cold environment. And not really anything else at this point is necessary to produce that phenomenon. And we can equate it very much to you being in a very cold environment in the North Woods or something like this in the 40 below. And if you breathe hot air, that moisture in your breath will condense and it will form a solid, right? And you see it, and you've been living with it your whole life, and everything has been fine with you in that understanding. That understanding can be extended to the upper atmosphere, equating your breath with a jet engine and moisture in a combustion process. And certainly in a theoretical world, and in terms of a historical world, it's understood that if you're running a clean engine, that exhaust is primarily water vapor that you're speaking of. And then you'll find that I started talking about clouds later on and what was different about them. And what was different about clouds, a very fundamental difference about the formation of a cloud, was that you had to have particulate matter. You had to have extremely fine materials in the sky or in the air in order for those clouds to form. So this is a solid. You're talking about a physical, it may be small, but you're talking about particulate matter, okay? They call these cloud nuclei, is what they call them. They're extremely small, very, very small, submicron size. So you have this crucial fundamental difference showing up that in one case, you don't really need anything except the moisture. But in the other side, where you're forming a cloud, you have to have some solid material available for that moisture to coalesce or to attract itself to. And again, this may sound trivial, but it's certainly not trivial to me, because you need to know in your heart whether or not you speak the truth or not when you talk to yourselves as well as amongst ourselves. Do we know the truth or not? And so you have this difference, and then along with the introduction of that distinction on my side, you had the continuing language and manipulation that attempted to blur these lines. And it was a very confusing period for many, many years, in that the language was blurred between the use of the term contrail and clouds. And it was stated that basically these things are really just variations of the same thing, and that there's no way you can really draw any distinction between them. And NASA, many of you are familiar with that somewhat infamous document. You had 4 federal agencies come out together and produce what they call the contrail fact sheet. It's an interesting declaration, because you basically have lies. These are outright lies that are told, and you start calling contrail you start labeling it as a cloud, as a variation on a cloud, and it's strictly wrong. if you accept that the primary exhaust is water vapor. Now, that would be a starting point for you. But by the way, if it's not, you've got a pollution issue coming up that you're going to be dealing with in one way or another. Now, this went on for many years, and it's true. What we're saying is true. But there were a couple of ingredients that were always sort of missing in my mind. And there's some really interesting questions that come up, actually, when you get involved in this meteorology study. And one of them has to do with, why are clouds forming where they are? In other words, why are they not down on the ground level most of the time, which would be the fog? And why are they not up where the planes fly? And by the way, one of the reasons the planes fly up that high is because there isn't anything up there. And it's a better medium if it's smooth and stable environment. That's one reason aircraft would be tailored to be more efficient at high altitudes. You would want to be above the clouds. But, that's an interesting question in terms of why are they there. And another question that came up to me over the years, which is really interesting, is why the heck aren't they frozen? The temperatures, if you look at those scales and graphs of the temperature, you're up to minus 40, minus 50, even minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit or centigrade at that point. They're pretty much the same as you get up there. So at mid-levels, like 25,000 feet, something like this, 25,000 feet where the cloud formations are, you're still dealing extremely cold temperatures. So another question is why aren't those frozen? And there's reasons for this, and I don't claim to necessarily have all of them, but these are just some of the interesting things that it's not always quite as obvious as we might think it is.